Professor Wang here in Beijing. The latest, of course, is the DPRK ICBM missile test, and that is, according to Pyongyang, a success. So what is going to be the significance of this agreement between the Russian and the Chinese side when the two presidents met, that they agree on bilateral rhetorics toward the parallels that the Chinese talk about, and they also urge the relevant parties to move toward negotiation?
I think it's very significant for President Xi and President Putin to reach the consensus, because the South Korea President Moon Jae-in just visited the United States, also reached this idea. And so China and Russia is two permanent members of the United Nations. So we are strongly defend of the non-proliferation and also for the international strategic stability there. So when the North Korea launched the ICBM, this definitely is not just the environment, security environment of the United States and its airlines, right, but the international system.
There are actually three layers to this, if I could go to you, Mr. Babich in Moscow. One is the two sides have agreed that the parallel suggestion put forward by the Chinese side, one thing is to let DPRK freeze the nuclear and the missile programs. Another thing parallel with this is to let United States and South Korea abstain from doing war games in the region. That's one layer. The second layer of this is both sides urge relevant parties to resume negotiation and try to create peaceful disposition and mutual trust. Third layer of this, agreed by China and Russia, is possibility to have the issue resolved and rule out any military solution. So the three layers very clearly cut out already a framework to resolve the crisis as the world sees it. Mr. Babich, what do you think about the significance of these three layers put forward by the two presidents ahead of the G20 Summit on the day DPRK launched the ICBM successfully?
Well, I think that I absolutely agree with you that this is a very important statement that both President Xi and President Putin made in Moscow. They basically agreed on the main issues over the North Korean problem. The call for mutual abstainment, I would say, that the United States and South Korea should abstain from new exercises, and North Korea should abstain from missile launches. There is a complete agreement on that between Russia and China. The problem is not in Russia and China, the problem is in the United States, because the rhetoric that we hear from Mr. Trump cannot be called peaceful. Mr. Trump is scolding both China for not applying enough pressure on North Korea and Russia for simply not bowing to American pressure on a lot of other issues. And with this kind of attitude from the United States, of course it's going to be difficult for Russia and China to preserve stability in Southeast Asia, but Russia and China need this stability and they will achieve it.
Okay.
I think at the summit in Hamburg, Russia and China will be speaking from the same position, not only on North Korea, but also on Syria and probably even on Ukraine.
This is a really big warm-up, as we're saying right now, for the G20 Summit. If we want to go into details of what the two sides have reached upon, President Xi and Putin agreed to seek a peaceful solution to the Korean Peninsula tension through dialogue and negotiation. You can take a look at some of the specific details over there in those quote on the screen. But let me go to you, Mr. Golstein. Will the urge from China and the Russian side this time, right before G20, be some words loud and also convincing enough to the other parties, for example, DPRK and particularly the United States?
Well, it's not clear. We don't know yet. The problem is that the President of the United States is somewhat erratic. So we don't know. Now, one day he might hear, another day he might change his mind. What I want to stress is that this meeting between two leaders, Russian and Chinese, comes at a very important moment. It's more or less half a year since President Trump came to power. He showed, he both his good sides and bad sides. So now it's important for other major players on the world scene to evaluate it. And I think that was the major thrust of this meeting. So we, Russia and China, we already met 22 times. We know each other very well. Our relationships are good, but there is this free agent. There is this kind of big unknown. So we have to sort of, make it clear as major powers. We have to make it clear that the way to negotiate, the way to the future is through negotiation.
Yeah.
To abstain from escalation, abstain from intimidation, abstain from the threats. And what is interesting to stress that South Korea seems to agree with it. That new South Korean leadership trusts Russia. They know that Russia is one of the few countries which have a diplomatic relationship with North Korea. And they say that Russian approach of de-escalation, of negotiations, is kind of important. So I think the way to convince both sides is to sit down and negotiate. Will they? It remains to be seen. My feeling is that even President Trump might be willing to negotiate. He actually said that he might be willing. But we also have to keep in mind the traditional foreign policy establishment who somehow views North Korea as a rogue state, and they don't want to negotiate.
Professor Wang, here's another thing. Since Professor Golstein mentioned about the South Korea, right before the visit, President gave an interview to the Intertas News Agency in that he specifically mentioned about the United States and South Korea need to work to scrap off and at least stop the installation of the THAAD system. So you see this very dramatic changes of opinions and also of positions coming from various parties earlier involved in the six-party talks, and this time certainly with the DPRK, as he said, successfully launched the ICBM, things are going even further to the attention of the world. Professor Wang.
Well, yes, it's very important because the United States, took the excuse of the Iran of the ICBM or other missile, and then have the missile defense system in Eastern Europe. Now the United States did similar things in Eastern Asia, make the excuse of the North Korea's nuclear and missile threat to hurry up to deployment of the Assad. And that is one of the important is the U.S. Global missile defense system. So the both sides, they need each other. That's the
and of course, Chinese and Russians are very nervous about this.
Of course, our environment, security environment, gradually undermined because of the Assad system.
I see.
Of course, also because of the North Korea.
Professor Wang, I want to push forward a little bit on that. We see the meeting of the two presidents, Chinese and Russian. Of course, this is already their third time this year, but this is an interesting time right before G20. Meanwhile, Chinese and the American president just made their phone call yesterday, even though there seem to be apparent disagreements about where should be the emphasis of the bilateral relations. China even talked about some of the negative factors in the overall bilateral relations with the United States on that phone call. And this is also, Russia was being accused of meddling with the internal politics of the United States, and certainly has become quite a reluctant player in the overall drama in Washington right now. So meanwhile, Professor Golstein mentioned to us, countries in the world looking at the Trump-style leadership is looking at options rather than just American leadership now. So what would all of these factors mixed up together mean for this specific meeting between Russia and China?
That's a very concern of the President Trump. Somebody, even United States sides, are very worried about this. No consistent, coherent policy, foreign policy. They've been more driven by the energy, industries, like the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Change Accord and Wall Street. They increase the interest rates of the U.S. dollars, and also by the so-called military technology complex. And then that policy sometimes is not so coherent, and then even sends some wrong, complex signal and even dangerous signals to other partners.
But if I could ask you just directly, you don't have to analyze too much about the United States because we are talking about China-Russia relations. So, Professor
that really,
Wang,
we have the South China
what does that mean? Is China and Russia getting ever closer to an alliance?
No, I don't think there is.
Or what kind of partnership between these two countries? For our international viewers, this is extremely interesting. Directly answer.
Well, we say there are new type of great power relations, China and Russia. Non-alliance, now under the target of any third party, and of course it's but can safeguard the international strategic stability.
I see. Let's go to Mr. Babich in Russia. Is this partnership going to be sustainable given the political changes in Washington and its impact on the distinctive bilateral relations with Russia and with China?
I think the Russian-Chinese partnership is very sustainable precisely because the United States and the European Union are becoming so unpredictable. Let me say that, of course, there is not much sense in a military alliance between Russia and China. There would not be much sense if it hadn't been for the policies of the United States towards both Russia and China. The United States is surrounding both Russia and China by military bases. The United States accuses China and Russia of being aggressive states. Okay, right now Russia faces more criticism from the United States than China, but everyone understands that this can change abruptly. And it is not precisely Mr. Trump's fault. These negative tendencies started under Mr. Obama and even before that. So in this situation, the informal alliance between Russia and China is propped up primarily by the unpredictability of the actions of the United States and the European Union. So I believe in the Sino-Russian partnership, not only for economic reasons, but also for the reasons of security.
I see.
As far as economy is concerned, of course it makes sense to have cooperation between Russia and China, because according to the new Silk Road project, we can transport products from China about 3 times faster through the Russian territory and through the territory of the so-called Eurasian Economic Union.
But Mr. Babich,
the United States simply
Mr.
doesn't
Babich,
notice
Mr.
the
I
Eurasian
have to jump in about that because you can go on with your answer. I have to jump in on that, sir. What about that? I mean, you talk about the Belt and Road Initiative. You also talk about the economic corridor, Eurasian economic corridor proposed by Russia. Some say there has been some parallel between these two ideas. Will they work in partnership, or actually this could be in a way potential conflict between these two countries? That's a very important question. Mr. Babich.
Well, I think it's really an important question, but I think that a conflict right now between Russia and China, or between the United States and our two countries, would be a disaster. So I believe that there will be cooperation between Russia and China in the short perspective, and in the long run the United States will join it. What is needed is just a change in ideology of the United States. Right now the United States is guided by a very aggressive neoliberal ideology. When it changes, there will be complete agreement between all the 3 poles in this triangle.
Well, Professor Golstein, is Mr. Babich from Russia asking too much, given your knowledge about Washington? Ideology change?
No, I don't think I don't think he's asking too much. I think that's more or less the writing is on the wall. There was a short period of time with the collapse of the Soviet Union and with the moment when China was not an economic superpower, when United States could call all the shots, and it was like a unilaterally, run world. Now we have new players, and what both Russia and China are united about is they want multifocal world, multilateral world. So they each want to pursue their own line of development, but they want some kind of, international bodies, be it United Nations, be it other institutions who would solve, potential conflicts. There is always conflicts in development, but they would solve it diplomatically. They would solve it through, traditional means, not by, weapons, not by Tomahawk missiles, the way United States got used to during the last 20 or 30 years. But I suspect that, this is not, has to be all the time, and insane heads in Washington will prevail, and they will readjust their vision. The main thing is that, both, Russia, China, India, they understand that the world has changed. People in Washington are still kind of secluded, and they see it as it was 20 years ago.
Well, it's very hard to predict where the ideology is going, but for now I do want to ask that question, very specific question, rather than predicting about the future. Professor Wang, China, Russia, the two presidents met, Belt and Road Forum, the SCO Summit, now bilateral summit, later G20 Summit, later this year, BRICS Summit, the one of the 5 emerging economies together. They're going to have a summit as well. The two presidents are going to meet there as well. Given these really frequent, really high level, and every time reaching fundamental agreements kinds of exchanges and presidential meetings, what does this mean about the realities of the bilateral relations and the message sending to the rest of the world, it seems?
Firstly, the world is very complex and uncertainty. So China and Russia need to work more close to deal with it, because as the two permanent members of the United Nations, and also the emerging powers, and also developing countries, and so we need to work together to defend the post World War II world order, which the hub of the United Nations. At the same time, also we should jointly to shape a new international order based on the, I think, the sovereignty, international law, and also global governance. So many issues we should to deal with. SEO mostly focus on security. Now also mutual connectivity, and the Belt and Road Initiative, we highlight the principles of the synergies of the strategies with the Eurasian Economic Union. So many things we need to talk and coherent.
In fact, according to the common statements coming out of the meeting between the two presidents, there are some words, according to the RT Russia Today: development path, sovereignty, national security, development interests, all of these have to be steadfastly, jointly defended between these two countries. Those are very heavy words, I would say, Mr. Babich. Your interpretation, briefly.
Well, I think that there is no threat to world stability from Russia and China. Russia and China are acting as the two most responsible actors on the world stage, and these words, I would interpret them as one more proof that there is no threat emanating from Russia and China. There are two countries that want real global trade, that want real cooperation. These are Russia and China, and it's a boon for the world that these two powers that have not been very stable in the past, that now they are working as pivots of peace and stability in the world.
Mr. Babich has always been a cheerleader for China and Russia, certainly. And final words from you, Professor Golstein, very briefly.
Well, I think, if you allow me some kind of a metaphor, for the last 30 years, United States was a big truck on the road surrounded by small cars. And it was responsibility of these small cars to find their way around this truck. A truck can go anywhere at whatever speed it wants and do what it wants. Now, with Russia and China and other BRIC countries being big trucks, we need international rules. We need somebody who will monitor, some bodies who will, work together and face the multilateral world. And I think it's very important that Russia and China see eye to eye and insist on international rules, international negotiations, and other systems of control rather than unilateral decision and unilateral threats.